All right. If you like Bigfoot stories, you're in the right place and you have found your people. Welcome to Dixiecryptid. I really appreciate you visiting the channel and I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get rolling with 3 really good Bigfoot stories. All right, here we go. Here's an email from Andy. This is a good one. He writes, although I have an irreverent side, this story is true. I would not presume that you would read it in an episode, but if you think it's worthy, you're welcome to use it. Honestly, I'd be flattered. Why, Andy, be flattered? Because I read them all, brother. I'll read them all. He writes, my name is Andy. I'm a 5th generation Floridian, and I live in Southwest Florida. I'm 49 years old and I've spent much of my life in the outdoors and have hunted and fished my entire life. I live in Lee County, Florida, but the story I want to share occurred in Charlotte County, just north of Lee County. My experience piggybacks off a story that was told to me by an old friend whose Floridian lineage goes back much further than mine. I won't give his name, but I will call him Billy. When Billy was a young man in the late 1960s, he used to hunt alligators with a friend to support his family. Technically, this was poaching, but it was what kept food on his family's table. And the point is not to judge his past, but to establish the setting for his story. Billy and a friend would have their wives drop them off at a certain location and pick them up several days later in the next county. During this time, they would travel and hunt as they walked through the Southwest Florida woods and swamps, collecting hides as they went. They only took with them a .22 caliber single-shot rifle and a cast-iron skillet with which to make their dinner over a fire. At dark, they would stash the rifle 50 yards from the camp under some palmettos in one direction and stash the hides 50 yards from the camp in another. This way, if they were discovered by game wardens, the worst trouble that they would be in would be trespassing. In those days, game wardens would go after poachers in the deep woods. The result was a cat and mouse kind of game. It was a real possibility that you could be camped in the middle of the woods 10 miles from the nearest road and be come upon by a game warden from out of nowhere. That's how the game was played. On one trip, Billy and his friends decided to carry a young fella along with them because he had heard their stories and wanted to learn how to do what they did. So they allowed this kid to come along. At one point, they made camp in the area of Avon Park, and after dinner, they laid down around the dying fire to go to sleep. During dinner, they heard something walking around the camp. It was heavy-footed and was walking on 2 legs. Although they could hear it, it was trying to be quiet. Billy thought it was the game warden watching them before he made his approach, so he whispered to the others to go about their business like they didn't hear anything and ignore it. But the game warden never approached them. Whatever it was just kept circling the camp. When they laid down to sleep, they were lying around the campfire with their bodies forming one side of a triangle with the fire in the middle of them. As the fire died and got dimmer, the unknown creature would come closer. This made the men a little nervous, and the kid was downright scared. Billy would quietly place some wood on the fire to brighten the light so he might be able to see whatever it was, but when the fire got brighter, the thing would retreat further away. Eventually, they let the fire die down. When this happened, the creature walked into the camp. The kid startled and frightened the creature, and all 3 men jumped up. The kid and Billy's friend standing behind him, Billy in front, closest to the unknown creature. Billy grabbed the only thing there was to grab, the cast iron skillet, and held it above his head, ready to hit whatever this thing was. There they all stood, inches away from each other in the pitch dark, the creature on one side and the 3 men huddled together on the other. It was a standoff of sorts, just a few feet from each other. Billy said the thing was close enough that he could feel its breath on the hair of his arm. After a short time, the thing backed away and left through the woods, making clicking sounds as it walked. They didn't have any more problems on this hunt and went about their business. The kid never asked to go with them again. Although Billy continued to hunt, he never again experienced anything like what happened that night. When he told me the story, I asked Billy if he thought it was a Sasquatch or a skunk ape, as they're called here, but he would not say. He would say that he didn't know what it was because he never saw it. He would also say that in all his life and all the time he spent in the woods, he never heard anything like it. It was heavier than they were, big, and definitely walked on two legs. Billy told me this story a few years before the same exact thing happened to me. I wasn't poaching, though. My friend and I were returning to his home in Port Charlotte off Kings Highway. We were coming back from a late-night fishing trip at around 2:30 a.m. It was a new moon and very dark, with the only light coming from a distant street light and a light on his front porch, but it was completely inadequate to light our surroundings. His house was in a sparsely populated place with few houses. The land was primarily scrub oaks, and you could walk through the wooded areas of the neighborhood and under a nearby overpass to the main woods and cow pastures that stretched for miles east of I-75. We were in his driveway unloading our fishing equipment. About 30 yards away, just out of the ambient light cast by the front porch and the street light, we heard something discreetly walk on two legs from the sand on one side of the road, across the asphalt and into the scrub oaks on the other side. Whatever this thing was, it was heavy, heavier than my friend and I put together. It was, without a doubt, walking on two legs, and as it left the road and became aware of us, it started making repeating clicking sounds. The sound of the whole event was almost muffled, and it wasn't until after the sound stopped that my friend and I looked at each other, asking, "Did you just hear that?" The recollection of Billy's story came back to me, and the gravity of what had just happened sank in. Like Billy, I cannot say that we encountered a skunk ape because we could not see it, but I've spent a majority of my life in the woods and around every animal that is found in the Florida woods, including panthers and bears, and I've never heard anything like this. Nothing I know of could have been responsible for the sounds that we heard. I will always wonder what we encountered that night. In a way, I feel our auditory encounter was more genuine than a visual encounter. A man can wear a suit and be mistaken for the real thing, but no man could have made the sounds that we heard. It was something that I'm unable to identify. Whatever it was, however, has convinced me without a doubt that there is something in existence that I cannot explain or identify, and it lives in the Florida woods, sometimes coming very close to humans. That's my story. Feel free to respond with any questions. I'll elaborate if I'm able. Andy, you're right. The audible, how do I say this? You can see a large shape walk across a road, but some of the noises that these things reportedly make are so weird. The chatter, the clicking, the whistling, all of those things are something that you can absolutely identify as not being an animal that inhabits, our natural animal that inhabits the woods where you live or where I live. So I get you there, man. That's a spooky story, especially those guys out in the woods and that thing walking right up to the fire, but they couldn't see it. Oh my gosh, it's just spooky. You know, there's a lot of stories like that, a lot of historical stories like that. But Andy, thanks for writing this out and sending it to me. It was great, and I'm really glad you sent it. Thanks, buddy. Here's an email from someone who wants to keep their name out of it. They want to be anonymous, no problem. And here's what the man writes. I would like to share an encounter my family had in West Virginia on a remote highway late at night many years ago. I had forgotten about this story after being in the military for so long and raising a family of my own. Many years ago, when my brother was serving in the U.S. Air Force, he came home on leave from Italy to Huntington, West Virginia. One evening, he and his wife were driving in the lead vehicle, and my parents were driving in the second vehicle. They were all driving on a fairly new highway in the mountains late at night and heading to see my sister, who teaches in a small town called Buchanan, West Virginia. Somewhere near Stonewall Jackson State Park, they saw someone walking on the outside of the guardrail, heading the same direction with its back towards them. It was extremely tall, broad-shouldered, dark, and walking along the side of the road. This was long before cell phones, so both vehicles continued to their destination. Immediately upon arriving, my brother jumped out of the vehicle and asked my parents if they had seen something. All confirmed a visual, and I believe they were just trying to register what it was. 35 years have passed, and I never thought about it. I completed my 20 years of active duty in the military, but continued serving in another way. I was visiting my parents for Christmas leave 3 years ago, and sadly, Mom was losing her battle with cancer. Early one morning, I read something, and it triggered the memory, so I brought the topic up and I asked her to talk about it. She repeated the story and said it was dark and the event happened quickly, but the thing that stuck in her mind was the massive soles of the bare feet as the headlights illuminated it. She said the length of the arms and swinging as it walked also stuck in her mind. I stared at my mom to see if she was pulling my leg, but it was apparent that she was being truthful and her eyes were pleading for me to accept her story. Then I told her that it's pretty cool because I had never met someone who had seen a Bigfoot. My mom was an amazing woman, and I have no doubt she was telling the truth. I believe they may have shared their story with others and had been laughed at, so they buried it. My father has never mentioned anything else about it, but last summer I got him to open up a little bit, and he repeated the same story but said that the gait and size were what stuck with him. He described movement that reminds me of the old grainy video from that Bigfoot sighting long ago. I hope that I can get my brother to share his memories on the topic. I appreciate what you are doing, and I enjoy listening to your videos. Man, that's a great story, and that's the old grainy video image that I think he's talking about is the Patty image, and that's what I always think about, too, when I hear these stories. But this is a great story, and I don't know what I would think if I heard my mom and dad talk about a Bigfoot. They would laugh. They would laugh at people who would say something like that. Not in a derogatory way or to humiliate them, but people just laugh at these stories because they really are far-fetched. I mean, they are. Ridicule is part of the game here, and I think that's something people have to endure. Anyway, thank you for sharing your memories and your mom and dad's story. I thought it was awesome, and I know we all enjoyed it. Thanks, buddy. This last story is from Steven. It's a good one. This is what he writes. This is my story, and this is how it happened. In March and April of 2020, the world is on lockdown, but some of us need to get out of the house. I'm retired and received supplemental income after some injuries when I was younger. I've always been the adventurous type in the family. While the world is on lockdown and people are acting like fools over toilet paper, I had plans of my own. Fresh fish for the supper table. My cousin and his son came over. Yep, we weren't social distancing. We took my side-by-side and made a run to the river. The area is a wildlife management area, and I went where my cousin told me to drive. We ended up way down some long-forgotten logging roads beyond where the planted pines stop. I asked him how the heck did he find this spot, and he said he had walked in the previous deer season while scouting. It was well over a mile through some of the roughest terrain south of Georgia can offer. There were some spots that made me real nervous as the four-wheel drive buggy would get sideways and slip off into the old skidder ruts way out in the river swamps. The area is known as Zero Bay. We finally made it to our destination. I parked the buggy in a small grove of wild maples, and we proceeded to hike down a well-used looking path to the river bank. This point was tricky. I have a bum leg and have to use a cane. The river had recently been into the bank, so the slick black mud was everywhere. After a bit of floundering, I managed to keep my footing and set up a small dove hunting stool that had a sling to carry over my shoulder. We sat about 50 feet apart along the bank. The kid was between us. Me and my cousin were talking loud so that we could hear each other. The black water was swift, and nothing but occasional bowfin or mudfish, as we call them, were willing to steal our bait. We were laughing about something or another when I suddenly got that feeling that an animal was near. I've hunted my whole life and I've logged countless hours alone in the woods, so it's just a feeling, a sensation something is there. My cousin was an avid hunter too and noticed immediately and told his son to hush and to let me focus. We waited in silence until what sounded like a screech owl down the stream to my left let out a shriek. "All hell," I mumbled, and we went back to our silly banter. Not long after, the squirrels up in that direction started cutting down and making a lot of racket, the kind where they see something that they don't like. It was about this time that nature began calling. My bladder told me that it was full and was in need of relief. So I got up off my stool and floundered for a moment until I got up that slick muddy bank and onto the top of the hill. I propped up next to the big pine and started doing my business. The squirrels were still making a lot of noise, but I assumed it was either the screech owl or us. And then I heard a thunk. It happened again and then again. I finished watering the weeds and took a few steps further out, and I glanced about. I didn't see anything. It was a solid sound like green wood on solid tree, just a hard resonating sound. I thought it might have been a woodpecker, so I went back to my stool and started fishing again. Soon after, I got the feeling again like I was being looked at. Then my cousin's son asked, "Who farted?" I smelled it too, and I wanted to say that it was a skunk to begin with, but it wasn't as loud of a smell as a skunk, if you understand what I mean. I told the boy it's some kind of methane seeping out of the mud along the bank. Man, it was rank, like sweat and body odor, but not a hot smell. It just stank. The breeze was coming across the river, which isn't very wide at all. That funky smell and the feeling of being watched, I expected to hear a deer blow at any time, truth be told. So I began looking through the trees, and as I peered slowly from one tree to another, I saw it. Next to a big bell-bottom cypress on the far bank, dark eyes, the hair was shaggy and unkempt, dark brown or reddish around the edges of the face. A flat-looking nose, but what I remember most was its mouth. It had as big a mouth as I'd ever seen on anything resembling a man. As I locked on it, it raised up slightly and began moving its lips, showing some rather large canines in quick movements as it rolled its lips and relaxed them rapidly. I tilted my head down but kept a trained eye on it. I said out loud, "Oh, to hell with it. Ain't nothing biting. My leg hurts anyway. Let's get out of here and go find a sandwich." My cousin's son said okay. His daddy was staring at me intently. I motioned with my eyes and I shook my head slightly as he started to turn his head to look. I made a lot of noise on purpose and I started towards the side-by-side. As I crested over the bank, there was a loud splash, like a whole pine tree had hit the water, and a loud and fast series of sounds I had never heard before. The boy asked what it was, and my cousin stared at me. I told him that it must have just been a big horned owl. I made sure our ride out was a hasty one. I've seen wild boar, have had to sneak off through the bushes away from a black bear sow with cubs too, and I've seen a couple of cougars in the region. But that was the first time in a long time that I was actually scared. Later that day, after we'd made it back to my house and shifted all the gear about, my cousin asked me while his son was out of earshot, "What the hell was that thing?" I looked at him and just shrugged. I told him I guess it was a sassmooch. I really didn't know. He denied it, not for his sake, but for the boy's sake, I do believe. He's been taking his stepson out deer hunting for a couple of seasons, and I think he doesn't want to scare the kid. I can still see that face peering at me, moving its lips. The head was slimmer at the brow, but the jaw was wider than the brow. The skin around the nose and the cheeks looked tanned like buckskin. small ears that were close to the sides of the head. I seriously doubt I'll go that far down into Zero Bay like that again by myself. Maybe I'll end up going back sometime this summer, but that's still uncertain, seeing as how I have good days and bad days with my health, and the bad seem to outnumber the good most of the time. I'm not afraid of the woods, I'm just more alert since that day. If you feel like sharing this, go ahead, just use my first name. Folks around here are strange enough as it is. I don't need them thinking I'm a complete nut. You probably are a nut, Stephen. Great story, and it was only just like less than a month ago. This happened less than a month ago. So I'm wondering if you've had any other activity since then, but that was kind of far away from where you live. But if you get back down in there and you see anything or hear anything else, let us know, Stephen. Thanks for the story, man. We really enjoyed it. Once again, thanks for listening to my videos. I really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next week on the next video. Thank you very much.